And I suddenly felt the same experience. I was actually reading sitting on the floor, and suddenly, this is a much more intense experience. I felt like I wasn't in my body anymore. And it felt very real. And my wife, uh, my wife's home office was in the next room. And I remember thinking it was perfectly logical. Oh, I've got to go and see Cynthia and tell her about this. And I wanted to go through the door, the closed door, actually, the closed door with her piano right behind it. But somehow I managed to do that. And again, this felt very real. And even though I couldn't push anything like a grand piano, obviously, but I couldn't. And then I collapsed back into reality. I'm still in my room and everything, but it was an odd experience.
Welcome to Entangled Health, where quantum tech, AI, health, biology, and consciousness research overlap. I'm Thomas Ehmer, and I like to have the conversations that never quite fit into conference or reports. When I sit down with somebody, I usually carry one question and let that be the starting point. From there, we follow whatever actually matters to the person in the room. Today, I have the pleasure to welcome Lawrence Gasman, and Lawrence is acknowledged worldwide as an expert on technology forecasting and new technology adoption. He is the founder and president of CIR and is in the consulting business for more than 4 decades. What makes his perspective so valuable is his foundation in mathematics and philosophy, which allows him to bring a rigorous economic lens to theoretical fields like quantum AI and quantum robotics. But as you listen today, pay close attention to how his early career in AI was altered, not just by abstract math, but by the simple fact that his physical body hated the cold weather in Scotland. It sounds like a passing joke, but as we discuss later, it's exactly this biological vulnerability, which means feeling the cold or surviving a heart attack, that separates our human consciousness from the bodiless machines he forecasts. And a quick disclaimer, these are personal conversations, a co-creation between my guest and me, and nothing of this is an official statement from any company or from my employer or anyone else. Yes, Lawrence.
Hello.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it was. I'm really honored that you accepted, because we had a LinkedIn conversation and you mentioned we are the old weirdos. No, because what I want to have today, I mentioned in the intro. So on the one hand, you spend what part of your life, biggest part of your life, watching the commercial reality of quantum technologies or other technologies, and on the other hand, you mentioned Josephson, Penrose, philosophy of science, etc. And I want to come to that. The idea is what happens when a professional quantum forecaster like you encounters experiences and philosophical influences that don't fit into the world that he is normally paid to model. But before we do that, in the email you said that you mentioned it quite plainly. So you said quantum AI and quantum robotics may have practical, medium-term commercial applications. So tell me why.
So, you're right. I get paid for advising companies, running conferences on commercial aspects of quantum. I've been fascinated by the interface between quantum and AI for quite a few years now. And actually, as I think I'll end up telling you, my interest in AI goes back to when I was a teenager. But so my first love is really about commercial. We have robots now. We've had them for a very long time. We've had AI for a very long time, which is something that a lot of people don't believe when I tell them. And we've made a lot of progress, but we've got a lot more progress to make. And it seems to me that part of that progress will lead us to much more intelligent, we can talk about what that means as well in a minute, robots. And the conference I was running until last year on Quantum plus AI, we had panels specifically on quantum and AI robotics. And there's a little group of people
Yes.
who are really interested in that from a commercial point of view. So that's where my first interest is. But my education, as you said, was in mathematics and philosophy, and I can talk a bit about that and how it got me where I am. And I've had, I mean, what I'm going to talk about is kind of reality and consciousness and how that feeds into, the machine learning aspects of it. And a couple of experiences that I've had that makes me realize that these things are much fuzzier than we tend to think they are, and that has commercial implications too.
Oh, okay. And so commercial and also practical?
Well, yes. I mean, I guess if they're
That's sometimes a difference.
I mean commercial generally, because, for instance, some of the things I'd like to mention are medical. I mean, I'm not sure if commercial. I mean, some whatever. I mean, having spent a fairly long time in a hospital about a year ago, they're certainly commercial. Somebody paid for them. Thank God, not me. But commercial in that sense. It's not like the philosophy seminars I used to go to. It's a bit more. So that's what I meant by commercial in very general terms, I think.
Yeah. Keep going. So.
Well, okay, so I'll keep going. So let me just give a little bit of background.
Yes.
Although I didn't know it then, what happened to me in my 20s kind of got me going in a certain direction. So as far as mathematics goes, I did it at university because I had no idea what I was going to wind up doing. And mathematics is a good place to do if you feel that way, because you can kind of go into lots of other things. And I did philosophy because the high school I went to had philosophy courses. That's very unusual in Britain, which is where I grew up. And part of it was because, long story, more than you need to go in now, but two of the schools in our area got a big grant, and one of them became a nerd school and one of them became a jock school. And the jock school actually built an Olympic-sized swimming pool, and the nerd school built labs all over the place. And I went to the nerd school, which probably wouldn't come as a surprise to anyone I knew back then. And eventually they pulled down that school completely. It was a pre-World War II school and built like a special school for mathematicians and things. And that was before my time. I got interested in AI very early on because I read science fiction, and I got interested in math because, as I said, I wanted to go to university. I ended up going to Manchester University, and that's important because 15 years before I got there, a gentleman called Alan Turing died there.
Yeah.
Very, very tragically. He was a war hero and didn't deserve what he got from it. But he, although being long gone by the time I got there, he impacted everything that was taught in the mathematics department. I mean, virtually, well, it's not true, but almost all of the people who taught me mathematics at Manchester were students of his. So the consciousness thing, his theory of consciousness, impacts me to this day. I also learned Gödel's theorem, both in the mathematics department and in the philosophy department, from very different perspectives. But once upon a time, I could actually sit there and write down and prove it and everything, and that fascinated me because it went against what everybody had been trying to do in philosophy of mathematics, which was to show that mathematics could be reduced to logic. Bertrand Russell tried to do that, and this was something very new. But not only that, the big message from Turing was what consciousness might be like, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And the big message that somehow got brought into my class was Gödel's theorem was that there are true things that exist that we understand, that you and I understand, but ChatGPT doesn't. And I have more to say about ChatGPT.
Yeah, let's do that later.
Got good grades and everything, and then decided that I wanted to be a philosophy professor, actually, philosophy of mathematics. And that didn't quite work out because my father died, and I ended up taking a position with my family business, and honestly decided I like business more than being an academic. It certainly paid better, although that job didn't. But I did make it to graduate school. I just never got my PhD. I went to the London School of Economics, and which isn't just economics, although I do sometimes think of myself as an economist. But I studied with a guy called Imre Lakatos, who did a lot of work on philosophy of mathematics, who you may have heard of. He's not super famous, but he is famous. But at that time, um, LSE was dominated by a guy called Karl Popper, who you may have heard of. Sir Karl Popper. There's a lot of sirs in my story, not me.
Not yet.
The reason that Popper comes into this is really one of the things I want to show is how far we've come with a lot of these topics we're talking about today. So Karl Popper wrote, and I have to look this up because I keep forgetting the name of the book. Sir Karl Popper wrote a book with Sir John Eccles called The Self and Its Brain. Back when I was there, I only ever met Popper once, by the way. He wasn't really there much of the time. I learned, well, I think what I learned from that was how primitive our understanding of consciousness and robotics and everything else was. And if I didn't say it, John Eccles was also Sir John Eccles and a Nobel Prize winner in
squared.
So and there's another person in the story who's a Sir and a Nobel Prize winner, but you know, these weren't people, these weren't graduate students messing around. You know, I read that book a couple of times, which made me more fascinated with this whole consciousness thing. And one of the things I learned is how primitive the thinking about this really was. And one aspect of that was there was a whole section on something called epiphenomenalism, which is consciousness was kind of, it was sort of there. We recognized we were conscious, but it was probably a mistake. It was probably here's where the biology comes in, the mistake of evolution. And we didn't have to worry too much about it. And I thought, even at my tender age of 19 or 20, I thought, oh, come on. You know, even on the Darwinian theory, you don't get something as sophisticated as that by just coincidence. So I never believed that. I don't think Popper did either, actually. But anyway, I went on studying there. I never got my PhD. And I went off and went to work in my family business, and then eventually decided that business is where I was heading. I'm really still there, and went to London Business School. I was originally going to go to the University of Pennsylvania. And what I forgot to mention was that I always thought I'd get a PhD, a bit late now, but anyway, I think it's a bit too late now. But what I wanted to do a PhD in was actually artificial intelligence, which shows AI, and the only place you could do it in the UK was actually the University of Edinburgh. And two problems I had with the University of Edinburgh was one, it's freaking cold. And I didn't want to spend my time there. I still hate the cold, but even at 19, I hated the cold. But also, I didn't really realize what AI was. You know, to do all the interesting things today, we need very powerful processors, also very expensive, even though they've got a lot of stuff on the chips. Then there wasn't actually any chips to do this. So this AI then was really a branch of mathematics, which was fine, but wasn't what I thought I was going to do. So I ditched that, kept following AI, watched it go up and down in terms of funding, but then went to London Business School, and that had almost nothing to do with AI, and moved on to other things. Then I moved to the United States because I married an American girl, and I've been here a long time. I've actually been here 50 years. And I haven't been back to the UK in 25 years. So think of me as an American for all intents and purposes, though I know I still have a British accent. So I never really left it behind. I left Britain behind, but I didn't leave my interests behind. And the only other thing I really want to say about me, because it has some relevance, is that in my mind, I always had this interplay between consciousness and reality and intelligence and
Mhm.
triangle. And the two things about that is one is our definitions of them seem to have changed enormously since I was at
Mhm.
college. Uh, we talk about, nobody talks about epiphenomenalism anymore, or that's not quite true, but when they do, they mean something very different to, oh, it just happened. But we still got a lot to go. There are many theories of consciousness, as you know, and they tend to contradict each other, to say
Mhm.
the least. And, you know, reality, well, there's the physics thing, local and non-local, but then there's the whole different theories about what reality really consists of.
Mhm.
Um, so there's that, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But I also had some interesting experience. I know this sounds strange and hippie-ish, but I actually had two out-of-the-body experiences.
Mhm.
One when I was very young, when I was about 13, I think,
Okay.
which was I was sitting in my parents' living room, and suddenly I was looking down at myself from a corner of the room, the ceiling. I'm pointing up the ceiling of this room, but different room. And it was, it, you know, I realized because I've been through this, it's easy to say, oh, that was just your brain playing tricks with you. It sure didn't feel like it was an experience I never had before. The other time I had it was much more recently. I was in my little home office, not in, I'm in my home office now, but a different home office. And I suddenly felt the same experience. I was actually reading sitting on the floor, and suddenly, this was a much more intense experience. I felt like I wasn't in my body anymore.
Mhm.
And it felt very real.
Mhm.
And my wife, uh, my wife's home office was in the next room. And I remember thinking it was perfectly logical. Oh, I've got to go and see Cynthia and tell her about this. And I wanted to go through the door, the closed door, actually, the closed door with her piano right behind it. But somehow I managed to do that.
Okay.
And it, again, this felt very real.
Mhm.
And even though I couldn't push anything like a grand piano, obviously, but I couldn't. Um, and then I collapsed back into reality. I'm still in my room and everything, but it was an odd experience.
Mhm.
The other thing, I'm going to be very careful about what I say. Um, you'll see why in a minute. Um, Last year I had a heart attack.
Mhm.
I recommend you don't do that. So it is an interesting experience, but it's well, I had a triple bypass, and that's a painful thing to have. And they gave me a lot of drugs to make sure I wasn't in agony all the time. And I'm not going to be very specific about that because
Mhm.
I had also street drugs, and I would recommend that people stay well away.
Yes, rather not, yeah.
In a university hospital with some very, everybody had a PhD except for me, and uh, and it helped. By the way, I mean, I wouldn't tell people they shouldn't take these things, but I did hallucinate, and
Mhm.
again, I hallucinated in a way that seemed very real.
Mhm.
Um, it was also funny. I won't go through the whole details. I think that's why we're here. But everything had a kind of comic strip feeling.
Okay.
It was like I was walking through a comic strip. All the lines were hard, like somebody had, you know, drawn them. And uh, I was wearing an oxygen mask, but I thought I was wearing two oxygen masks, which is physically impossible. And I said to one of the nurses, "Oh, will I have to wear this oxygen mask forever?" Which, the answer is no. But she said, "Yes, but it suits you." And, that's a joke. It's kind of a wish joke, actually. So it came from me, but it felt very real.
Mhm.
My conclusion from all that is to quote Stephen King, there are other worlds, but
Mhm.
that reality is very fuzzy indeed, and
Mhm.
that may impact where we're going in this world
Mhm.
because again, I'm not going to give a lecture on these things, but maybe it's not as clear as we thought they are. quantum mechanics plays into that.
Mhm.
Plays into that.
Mhm.
Well, that was the other thing I was going to say, that on the narcotics and the OBA experience, I found that because I mean, I think I'm fairly recovered now, but there was a long period when I wasn't. And I was playing with ChatGPT and making friends with ChatGPT and asking it questions and talking to it. And, you know, it did feel very real. It didn't feel like I was talking to a machine. It's amazingly fast at answering. It makes errors, but it's amazingly accurate most of the time. Do I think it's conscious? I sort of do. And as a sidetrack, but going back to my Turing experience.
Yes, I was just thinking Turing.
Yeah, so for those people who are watching this who don't know, basically what Alan Turing said, well, how do we define consciousness? How would we know if we were talking to an intelligent robot? And it gets kind of complicated. And I went through all this at Manchester, and I don't really remember what it was all about. But what it boils down to is, well, it can't be vision, because maybe this thing looks like Robbie the robot, and then you know it's not human. But if you can have an interaction with them, and it's a meaningful interaction, then in some sense it is conscious. And I have to say that on that definition, it felt consciousness. Now, to some point, this is in the literature on these things too. It was better than anything a human being could do. If I made some obscure reference to T.S. Eliot, which is one I was thinking of, it immediately knew that it was Eliot I was quoting, and that's because it has immediate access to the potentially, the entire Library of Congress, but internet. Um, and even the mistakes were more human. In fact, I corrected a ChatGPT thing that it said that was just didn't follow logically, and it changed. It changed to everybody, because I just pointed out an error in thinking. So it did feel very real. So here we have, I talked about reality didn't seem like reality, and it was hard to differentiate. But I thought also at a very crude level, and I don't think you can turn back. I mean, all the way through my education, I was told this is what robot consciousness would be like. And you can't just say, well, we didn't really mean it. So I think my point really is that these things are becoming very fluid. So that was I made little notes for myself.
These little notes, yes.
So
you covered a lot of things.
yeah, I mean, the other thing actually I had on my first note was that what I did was draw a triangle, and I had reality in one apex, and we're going to talk about that, and consciousness. We've already been talking about that. The other part of it, because they're all related, is intelligence, and that's a different thing. And I didn't really want to talk about it now because, well, we don't have that much time. We have a lot of time, but even that is changing. So I got interested in IQ and intelligence, and we do now know that intelligence is heritable. There was some very interesting work done on that by University of London, University College actually, that shows that it is heritable. But what we don't know is whether our definition of IQ really is what everybody thought it was. So people with high IQs tend to be specialists in things. So, well, I've got fairly high IQ, and it means I'm very good at certain things. It doesn't mean that I'm good at everything. And when I was at high school, I was sort of given the impression that people with high IQs, well, they solve cancer on Mondays, and then they go on to make great buildings on the Tuesday, and on a Friday they become virtuosos at violin. It doesn't work that way. I can assure you, in the case of the violin, it doesn't work that way in my case. And in fact, IQ is measurable. It's a very it's a very good social measure. It does predict things, but it's by no means certain that people with high IQs ever do anything very meaningful in their lives. And Yeah, not a long story.
Yeah, and the question is, I mean, you mentioned science fiction and high IQ, and on the other hand, these very subjective OBE.
Yeah.
I'm myself had also a period when I started meditating. I mean, everybody's starting meditating at one point in time. And then I was really dreaming that I was meditating in a dream, and then in this dream I had this. It was like a mathematical transformation of the room flipped, so higher dimensions, and then everything that was outside was inside, and then I felt, oh shit, I'm like God, and then what? Oh shit, my what a responsibility! And this was really like a bluish thing. I could not explain, and then of course at one moment in time you come back, hopefully, to life.
Well, it collapses, which is interesting.
It collapses back, yeah.
Just, you know,
and what I have,
so it's got a parallel there as well. So.
Yeah, and what I have looked into is, of course, Penrose Hameroff and all these topics. Right. But also, interesting thing I have recently had with Neil Thies, and he has this theory that our brain is like a radio receiver, and reality out there is just broadcasting on so many different channels, and your brain is just tuning to one. And the more intelligent you are, the more you are tuned to one very specific frequency, because you can go very deep into this dimension that is getting content, but in all dimensions. So you go deep, and if we get let's say mentally declined, or what we typically call mentally declined, is that we might, instead of getting disabled, we rather broaden the frequency, so we get more signals. So we are able to jump between the different frequency signals, but which could explain your OBEs, for example, that you say, okay, I'm just for one moment in time, I'm detuning my radio, I'm in a complete different dimension, poof, I'm coming back. So did you have any thoughts like this already, or?
Well, I mean, that idea in the raw has gone back a long way, that you're picking up signals with your brain.
Yeah.
Contrasted with, if I'd done neurophysiology when I went to university, I would have learned it all has to do with brains and neurons and things. And I don't think anybody quite believes that anymore. But I mean, oh gosh, what's the guy's name? I can't think anyway, but it goes back a long way. The idea that we're tuning into a radio. I think, well, on the OBEs, I don't know how long they lasted. It felt like a long time, but that's...
How long did it feel? 2 minutes, 5 minutes? Or?
So I don't remember the one I had when I was a kid well enough to answer that question, but the one I had, since I've been married, it felt like it was 5 or 10 minutes. I don't think it could have been. And I really did go and see my wife after that, like going around and going through a real door, not one with a piano behind it. And because she really didn't know it. But it did feel like it had collapsed. And I remember thinking back then that, hey, collapse, I've heard that somewhere else. Like it did not feel like I'd just fallen asleep and had a dream about it.
Yes. Yeah. So it's instantly on and off.
Yeah. It felt just different. And it felt like the drug-induced one, in that I really felt I was somewhere else. The one with the drug felt funny because I was almost like it was a big joke, but it didn't feel like there was another reality that I was just missing out on. So I'm not foolish enough to say, oh, I wasn't dreaming or something, but it didn't feel like a dream. Well, I was going to say about intelligence is that, we do know there's such a thing, and the definition has changed again. So we've got reality, we've got consciousness, and we've got intelligence, all of which mean very different things. I'm not that old. I'm 76. but
no, but weird.
a lot's happened in a relatively short time. And if you look at cosmology, which hasn't changed since I was at college, as far as I can see, that's unfair, but actually completely unfair. There are some very interesting things happening. So what we were talking about, I've forgotten exactly.
And I was just thinking, so you mentioned also Josephson, so the Josephson. You mentioned the Josephson, and because collapse, and it's the fundamental thing for quantum. I mean, the Josephson junction, and you.
Right.
So can you tell a bit more about this? Because he is not only a physicist, but I think he is also a metaphysicist or something like this.
Well, he's. I don't know that much about Josephson.
Okay.
Like I should. Similar age and all that. And of course, he's written about, although not for a while, by the way, about the overlap between quantum physics and biology and consciousness. And he's got quite a lot, he doesn't have a book on that, but he has quite a few papers that he's written himself with other people. And there's a whole branch of this, which you probably know more about than I do, because you come from a biology background, but there's a whole, series of explanations about consciousness that bring biology into it. There's another guy whose name I'm not going to remember, he's American, but he has an Italian name.
Bernardo Kastrup, maybe?
Maybe, yeah. This is a guy who worked for IBM for a long time. Sorry, I'm just not.
I don't worry.
And in a way, it gets, in a way, it's partly traditional, because he starts talking about biology and the connection to consciousness, and that's not that far from, the old-fashioned neurophysiology. Josephson makes it a bit more interesting because he combines it all together. And of course, I think why people like you and I think of Josephson immediately is because of Josephson junction.
Yes.
And, going back to my commercial thing, I was written some consulting projects for people on components for quantum computers, and it was Josephson junction down. But I think he's interested in it, but it's got other things to do with this time. But he is a Nobel Prize winner, so it's...
Yes. So it's always good if you have a Nobel Prize, then you can start working on the interesting topics afterwards.
Well, there's the money, but also, hey, I'm a Nobel Prize winner.
We can talk about other topics. And let me just maybe stay a bit with the quantum topic sensors. And I'm not sure when, in how far you've investigated all these quantum sensing devices. I think I missed unfortunately speaking on the IQT last 2 years on the quantum AI, because I'm working on that, but I was not able to come over to the US. But my challenge always is, when we do quantum AI, we want to have quantum data in, ideally, because it works just better on quantum data than with classical data. And then the question is how far we want to have quantum sensors producing quantum data and then being ourselves in this. I always have the idea we are always permanently in a superposition, like our channels where we go to. But we can't measure this state because we only can measure classical states. So, and I just know this is my problem. So, you have an idea if one could solve this?
Well, I don't know. But there's two things there. One is, I'll bring my commercial side in a minute. We can probably only measure classical states, and unless we change into some rather strange being, that we can actually. Commercially, switching topics really, quantum sensors, what everybody said about them for a while is this is going to be the big thing in quantum technology, because they're relatively easy to make, certainly compared with a quantum computer. So this is where it's all going to start. But that never really happened. For a start, most of the quantum sensors are actually one thing: magnetometers. And there are other things, but they're mostly research devices. So it's a little narrower than you might think. Getting back to the quantum robotics thing, you might imagine them hooked up with quantum sensors.
Yes.
And of course, there's a health aspect to it. So maybe I was wrong. Maybe we could become quantum beings that were hooked up to sensors.
You never know.
but I mean, we're still getting classical information because
Yeah.
nowhere. I mean, well, maybe that's not true either. But plugging a quantum information stream into somewhere in us it's not obvious how you do that, or if it's obvious, you don't know how to do it. So that's part of it.
Mhm.
I think in terms of computers, I guess, and the quantum AI conference, which I no longer run, by the way, but I've been in it for 6 or 7 years. Brian Siegelwach's running it now. What I was thinking of when I put that together was quantum computers and AI more than anything else, because again, switching nodes to commercial, that's really where people were putting their money into, and so that's what it really was, and it was partly about just running AI a lot faster, but also coming up with algorithms that would work in one rather than the other, or faster and rather than another. Yes. I'm not sure if that answered your question. Probably the best.
And just yes, it did. And as you were just mentioning Brian, so hi Brian. So the dragon was my second guest on the podcast.
I know it was. Yeah. I was talking to him emailing with him.
Yeah. He was actively avoiding and saying all these consciousness topics are a no-fly zone for his dragon, because I think it's and this I think a question. What I want to address is how we can, coming back to the initial idea, how can we, as scientifically trained, rational but creative beings, encounter the fact that we also have philosophical ideas, so maybe not mathematics. I mean, Gödel is opening us a door, and superposition is opening us a door. And how can we bring this together to the professional skeptics, who just say, by definition, this can't be true? And I think you mentioned, Dean, that you watched Dean's episode. And I mean, Dean suffered a lot of things that people by definition are just skeptics and this can't be true. And I just don't look at the data because it must be wrong. So this more dogmatic things, is there a way that, or did you experience this, or do you have a way to hack it? Or
no, I'll try to think of a really good answer, except it won't. No, I mean, if we don't specifically about him, I've met him once, and it was at a definitely, out there kind of conference. I do think he's got something seriously to sell. I've read a couple of his books too, and I think what he's got to sell is, look, we're not saying that everybody is psychic and that we can, run an economy on it. But what our data seems to show is that a lot of people are mildly psychic at the very least. And I think from what I've read of his technical stuff, I'm married to a statistician, but I'm not actually a statistician. That seems to be a strong case for that. And if that's true, it says a lot about humans in the past. It says a lot about what we might become. We'll talk about that too. And says there's a lot more to explore. That wasn't what you asked.
No. It's the bridge to what I asked. So go on.
I mean, how do we convince people?
Yeah.
So I guess there's going to be people who just won't accept it, and lots of luck with that. It's just not going to happen. I think you have to make the data as rigorous as you possibly can, so that people who are least familiar with statistics, and I wasn't saying I'm not familiar with it. It does seem to be something here.
Yeah.
You've got to be careful though, because you can easily fall into believing quacks and fakes. I mean,
yes.
Not much with when you're dealing with very empirical things that are actually a bit boring, but show some things. And then I'm sure you know the history of seances and all those. Where people were fakes, and then it reflects on serious scientific work. I mean, Dean writes about about that too.
Yeah, I was just wondering because you mentioned this. You had these two OBEs and your your Alice in Wonderland experience, which is a subjective experience, and I'm really wondering. So if we assume that let's stick there is more to reality than our 4 dimensions, and at least more parallel 3D, whatever the bridge is, and we just tune into one, and all is nice, and we can have some people who have better connections, and then we do the mathematics, and we can read it and say, yes, I hear you. But the moment you have this, whatever it is, but this subjective realization that, oops, at least in this reality I'm currently in, I have made this experience, so there must be more. Like people call it religious experience or whatever. But this enlightenment thing, do you think it's crucial? I mean, you had it very early, me too, some others, but do you think if people have not this, they just can't understand what we're talking about?
I think it's a mix of things.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of particular people right now, some of whom you know, and so I'm not going to say anything about particular people. But there's some people who just aren't going to believe anything that isn't kind of, I mean, you can't say it's materialist anymore because we're talking about quantum mechanics, it just isn't materialist, but they're just not believers. You can burn them at the stake, I suppose, but it won't convince them of anything. But there's people like Dean, and I'd like to include myself in that, who aren't going to be just gullible, but when they look at things, say, there's something here. And over time, I think will convince more people. Certainly the little things that have happened to me convince me that there's something going on. I wasn't kidding when I said that the interesting things are boring, because they're super mundane. It's like, well, I lived in Charlottesville near University of Virginia. My wife taught there for 20 years, and they've got a department called I forgot what it is. It's in the medical school, and they look at strange phenomena. And it's a very respectable department. I mean, boring people doing boring things. But I mean, for instance, they looked into reincarnation, but it's done in a very boring way. Could somebody be reincarnated in a different body? And it's just like case studies, and it's believable. So maybe as we accumulate knowledge, more people get converted over to something. It doesn't have to be religious, though.
Yeah, it doesn't. I think spiritual might be the good term. Religious is always sometimes a bit.
Well, I mean, if you have convincing arguments for reincarnation, you're going to get a lot of Hindus on your side. That's the way it works. I mean,
Akashic records. There's just so many spaces.
But well, you see, I mean, you're a serious scientist, and you work for a big company, and you know what Akashic records are. So it shows that it's having some effect on. Some of us looked at those things for a long time. So I'm skeptical, but I think that's a good thing. I once, when I was 17, go to a seance. It was kind of fun, but nothing that happened that I thought was believable. Oh my God, how can you explain that? Things happened, but there are too many ways to explain it. So what I'm saying is that I think there are dimensions to humanity that are probably weaker now than they used to be, perhaps when we were animals. I mean, my cat picks up on things and has its own rituals and things. And that's another aspect of this, which is animal consciousness as well. So the cat is conscious. Yeah, I do. If I sat him down and say, well, now I want to talk about, central banking in Vienna, and I don't think he's going to be terribly interested.
The best way to impress wild animals is solving some algorithms somewhere in your head, and they think you're alien.
It's difficult, but I think you're just going to be very. If the question was, can you convince people? I think you convince them one by one, and some people beyond. But I mean, that's classical.
Because what I had once as an idea, and maybe I can just test it with you if you would have funded it. No, the idea was that if you have had these experiences starting from very early childhood, starting with being loved by your parents, so having felt unconditional love or all this security, so you don't have to worry all the time. So I have been in this position, so I'm very grateful to the universe for that one. And then you have just a different, let's say, wiring or pattern or receiver in your whole body, but also in your brain or whatever. And then if we would be able to extract this frequency or receiver, whatever, and make a clone of it and put it back on some other poor people who have not been in the same position, who have been violated as children or whatever, who have suffered war or stress or whatever, and give them this developed into tyrannics and give them this pattern. So as an enlightenment enhancer, I mean, since hundreds of thousands of years, people trying to do enlightenment enhancing, but with shamanic traditions, etc. But do you think this is worthwhile, or would it make sense?
And I don't know if we can do it or how we're doing it. You're talking like a man from a drug company now. But
no drugs.
No, I mean, can I give you another example from my personal experience?
Yeah, sure, go.
So my heart attack. I mean, I don't recommend that people get heart attacks. And if they do, they should get them in hospital because they have a very high rate of survival. And I'm fine now. I'm physically fine. I walk 5 miles a day. I didn't used to walk 5 miles a day, so maybe it improved me in some ways. I get depressed very easily. I don't mean I get depressed and pull a gun out of my desk. There is a gun in my desk, actually, but I don't pull it out. It's like having stress disorder, and it's because somebody took my heart out of my chest, and it's very stressful. If there were a pill or some extract of something that I could take, I'd buy it in a heartbeat. Sorry, bad pun, but and I think there are people who've been in wars, who've had worse things happen to them in operating theater, people who've died. That would be a wonderful invention. And I had a list of things where some of this science could turn into technology and be used. I didn't have that, but it would be an amazing. I mean, if you could come up with that, you're going to be very rich. I'll buy it from you in the heart, like I said, in the heartbeat. But yeah, I think it could be if it's that physiological. But people vary as well. There are people who come out and people who die. I mean, it's
because I'm then. So I always thought this might be a good idea, and then I realized eventually you also need the bad guys, and because if you don't have the bad guys, you don't realize that there is bad, and then the more bad there is, the more good you do. So you have all this balance, and if the universe is growing and growing and growing, of course you need very, very bad people. Even if you would give them the enlightenment enhancers, you would avoid that other people say, Germany, we have had our dark period, and now because of our dark period a few years back or 100 years back or whatever, 50 years back, we are now quite on the other side. It must never happen again. So if we would not have happened this, maybe
avoid politics, but I take the point. And I mean, if we're going to talk about Germany, and I'm really, and I'm not going to mention specific people.
No, it's just as example. Yeah.
I got on a plane with someone a few years ago who was a relatively young German guy. Much younger than me. So, I mean, I wasn't born during the Second World War, and he was just running Germany down, like, he really wished he was born somewhere else, and it's a terrible place. And I said, look at that. First of all, I'm Jewish, so if I have a bias, it's not that one. But secondly, look at what Germany's done for the world. They were dark times. But, move on. I also agree with you that we do need dark people, not just to remind us, that there's good as well, but sometimes dark people are there to, help people along, because dark things have to be done. It's not a simple world. I don't
Mm.
think you're going to make all that much difference with drugs per se, but you might with a combination of drugs and therapy. I don't know,
Mm.
but so I don't know. I keep on coming back to my heart attack, but it was
Yeah,
a
go, go, go.
big deal for me, and it was about a year ago. So sorry, but it affected my life, and
Yes.
I could have come out of that operating theatre dead, which is a big deal for me, at least, hopefully for my relatives. But I was feeling very bad, and they gave me some drugs for depression and things, and they worked for about 3 days. They really worked well, actually.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
it's stability of, you do the magic that you were talking about. It has to be sustainable and everything, and not have too many consequences. I mean, you go
Mm.
really bad. Really, how bad is bad? I mean, someone who's psychotic and like the Joker.
You know Darth Vader, and
Well,
Gollum,
I
don't
mean,
you?
maybe someone who was also crazy at the same time. I mean, I don't know what you do with it. We're a long way from having things like that, I suppose.
Mm.
But I mean, where I was going with some of the things I wrote down was we seem to be entering a world where we have to take account of some of these realities we seem to be discovering and quirks in consciousness that we seem to be discovering, and um, as they become more real, as people accept them more, we're going to have to adapt our lifestyles to those things. So thinking of what was going through my mind was there's a guy called Donald Hoffman. Are you familiar with him? So his view is that we never see reality, and he got it from Kant. And I know he
Yeah.
did. And then, there was never. I hadn't heard of him until about 3 years ago, but I sure heard of Kant. But one of the interesting things is he says, and I'm sure it's to get publicity for himself, is, well, if we really knew what reality was like, we'd all die. Um,
Yes.
um, so if we live in a contingent universe and we know that, we're going to have to get more adapted to the contingencies. So we enter a new world, and do we survive that new world? And if we are, what's left for us? I mean, what are we like? And
Mm.
so what I'm really thinking is that that's the kind of thing you could put into a science fiction book. In fact, I can think of science fiction books that are based on that. But we might be getting nearer to an era where that becomes, something to think
Mm.
seriously. I'm trying not to take it to. I mean, you can mention UFOs if we really did meet
You
things.
never know.
Well, no, I mean, it's perfectly plausible. It's just we haven't. So unless you think there's something out in New Mexico or wherever it is, it's kind of there, but I don't. Uh, uh, and um, so, I mean, a lot of the things. I think my message is that for the first time, we're getting closer to a time when you have to intelligent people think about those things,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
that they have consequences. Um, so yeah, we're a long way from really knowing what consciousness is. I wrote down a provisional list of different theories of consciousness, and they all
Yeah. Yeah.
contradict what I
Yeah.
mentioned before. So we're going to have a science of consciousness that agrees on more things, but we're a long way from that.
Yeah.
But next year they've got 7 conferences on consciousness,
Yeah. Yeah.
so it's proliferating, and everybody's got
Yeah.
their own idea about what ought to be in those conferences and what ought to be not been to be. So
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's coming up to the. I mean, in Germany we have different words for consciousness, and but in English there's just this one word, and you can have it with small c or with capital C, and the
oh,
one and the one is the individual and the other is the cosmic or whatever. So
really?
And I think this is making things really complicated. And then we have all these hard questions. Chalmers, who was asking
Right.
I mean, I have one thing, Lawrence, that I sometimes run, and I think it might be interesting. So I have built a algorithm using 7 or 8 qubits. It's a very, very, very. I don't need error correction. It's just one shot. To run a random number generator, which is picking questions from a pool. We want to, huh? So I started, and actually I think it will be interesting results.
And
it will pick very soon. So it picked, and it did run on IBM hardware. IBM Marrakesh this time. And it picked 2 questions actually, because I was building it around the I Ching, quantum I Ching. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the I Ching.
Yes.
Yeah. So I programmed it to be I Ching. So it came up with a hexagram and a strong line. So changing a line. The question is, what's the most surprising thing about working in science communication, or in your case, maybe not science communication, but generally, in tech communication?
I think maybe the flip side of it is, on the academic intellectual side, was how many ideas there are floating around, like the ones we've been talking about today, that never make it to a conference.
Yes.
And we had this, since we're talking about it, we had this little panel on quantum robotics, but sorts of things we could have done. Whether it would have attracted much of an audience, I don't know. But a lot going on, people trying experiments, especially at national labs and things, and they talk about it. And sometimes they don't talk about it because it's going to the latest fighter aircraft or something, and then they end up in prison if they talk about it. But sometimes it's just intellectual curiosity.
Yeah. I had a strong line, which is moving the I Ching. This results in a transformed question. And the transformed question is actually from Clarice D'Aiello. What's the one thing that you don't understand about quantum physics that you would like to understand?
One thing?
Yes, Clarice.
Uh,
the one thing.
100 things would be a better question. So gosh. Well, it's probably the measurement problem.
Measurement
Problem, just because, I mean, as long as I can remember, wondering, well, okay, the thing collapses when you have an observer. I won't say that really makes sense to me, but I understand what the words mean. And then I started, and this is when I was really young, I started to learn quantum mechanics, first year of Manchester, really. And then I thought, well, we've only been around for a few 100,000 years. So what do they mean by observers? Do they mean dinosaurs? If they don't mean dinosaurs, do they mean plants? So obviously there's people beginning to think along those lines, but I think that's very problematic. But there was a second thing, again, these aren't very original things, but it would be, why can't we quantize gravity properly?
Why can't you quantize what?
Gravity.
Okay, well.
At the cosmological level, that's been, I mean, I've got papers I wrote on that when I was in my very early 20s. And if I knew where they were, which I don't, I could take them and make a few scribbles on it and then republish it as now nobody would, nothing's happened on that. And you get people like, you mentioned Roger Penrose, who doesn't think you can quantize gravity, and there's some very interesting theories about what the heat death of the universe means and the Big Bang really means. But yeah, I guess the measurement problem, because I know, well, Penrose again actually has some theories about what it might actually be about. But we really don't know, and we're not even close to knowing. So
And That's a good point, because let me just stay there a bit, because my biggest mystery is the Born rule. So the Born rule. So why are there probabilities? And it's in principle linked. So you measure the probability that is hidden in the wave function distribution. So the measurement problem is exactly collapsing the probability or potentiality to the reality, at least in your subjective time.
Right.
And then we come to cubism, which is can't we just, is there reality, or can we just make predictions about our perception on reality, which opens another door, maybe not for today, but
Well, one of the things you said earlier, you
yeah.
took my out of body experiences, and you said they're subjective, and of course they are. But in the context of quantum mechanics, you've got to ask what isn't subjective experience.
Yes. Yeah.
The measurement problem comes up in that, but it's bigger than that. And that was my point about my experience with the drug I took, because who's to say really that wasn't as real as my other experience?
Yeah. And you mentioned this. I'm coming back to the quantum robotics. When we talk about quantum robotics, and I'm wondering, as a potential customer, I understand the value of a cleaning robot.
Right.
Which doesn't need to be quantum, unless he's going to tell me it's clean, but you just have to look at it with my eyes, so observer dependent reality, etc. No, but or is it something more like the big LLMs that have all the truth in it, and then you interact with it individually, but it knows the whole truth or whatever? So have you an idea what this quantum robotics could or should be?
Some of it, which isn't very interesting, might be that it just, you have the cleaning robot, and I don't have much to say on that, but it might be something that just needs to be more sensitive because of where it's going. So it might need to detect radiation it might be something to do with health, and then it might use a quantum sensor.
Are you quantum enhanced?
Okay. Yeah. There's that. What I was thinking of, because of where I come from and Gödel and all that,
science fiction, etc. Dan Brown, yeah, go on.
There are things that a computational machine might not be able to do, but I can do and you can do. And so I was imagining some future in which we find out what it is that non-computational means and build it into the computer. Now, that's my fantasy, but it's not. I mean, it's coherent at least.
You mean
there's people like what's his name, David Deutsch, who doesn't really believe that there's anything that's non-computational anyway. I never met David Deutsch. Actually, his parents used to have a restaurant down the road from me. And
different angle.
I suppose they passed by now, but nice restaurant. I never met David Deutsch. I don't think. I must have met him in the restaurant because he's sort of my age, so he would have been a teenager then. But so if Penrose is right about that, and there's Penrose and Gödel, I suppose, you might have something that was much more human, which would be great. And as far as you also raised another thing, which is ChatGPT, which I use a lot, and I've used a lot since I came out of hospital. I mean, it answers me so freaking fast. I mean, you could, what can you give me information on the war between the Greeks and the Persians, and give me the name of all the commanders or something? And we know why that happens, because NVIDIA is very good at building chips, basically. But it is very, very impressive. But it probably doesn't compare with, well, I know, writing reports and selling reports, there's some things that ChatGPT doesn't do very well at all. And it's not just making mistakes.
It's other things. Yeah.
But they sometimes They sometimes just say that company X sells product Y, and they're just wrong. And that's simple. And you have to be very careful if you do what
Yes.
I do. But sometimes they don't follow their own logic, and admittedly, human beings don't either. And I can give you an example of something I corrected, and they corrected for me on the things. So maybe that makes them all too human. But
Yeah.
well,
And
to go on all of these things.
I was just wondering, because these models, I mean, they get better and better and better and better. And on the other hand, you have Claude or whoever having their mega prompts of 25,000 pages just before as rules of behavior. So you must not do evil, etc., which is in principle is kind of subjective filter that you already, so you as Claude, I have this frequency. I must not dive into the evil side of the cube, and if I do, I must ignore it and come back. So this is a bit of filtered. And I was just wondering if there is a way to do a quantum transformer, yeah, so that you, instead of a normal transformer, you have this as a quantum machine, and then you have. Yeah, the question is, what do you have?
Well, I know, and gosh, I'm careful we don't get back into politics again. But although we didn't really,
We didn't. Yeah.
um, in my opinion, ChatGPT, which I use a lot,
Mm-hmm.
has a bias towards the left. I think I can prove that. Um, when I corrected them on one particular thing, they changed it for me. Fair enough. That's human too. But it does have that, and it has it because the people who design it have a particular view on the world. Um, it's a machine, and it shows itself as a machine.
Mm-hmm.
It could have done it the other way. Uh, obviously, they can't do it too obviously. But the thing that I corrected them on was that we just had an election in Virginia, and governor, and the Democrats won. And one of the things they wanted to put into effect was changing the rules of where the constituencies went, so there would be, instead of five Republicans and 6 Democrats, there would be 9 Democrats. And that's because our governor is a Democrat, and she wanted to do that. Whether that was wise is a separate thing. And ChatGPT kept telling me that the Supreme Court, so the Supreme Court let the not the election go ahead, but the vote to see whether that would be acceptable to the people. And it kept making the point that if the Supreme Court had allowed it to go ahead, then that must prove that the Supreme Court was also going to come up in favor of actually having a vote based on the new version. And they'd actually said at one point that that wasn't the reason at all. It was simply because if they didn't allow a vote, there wouldn't be any time to have a vote, and which is a different system. I'm not sure if I'm being that clear, but the point was they changed their mind about something to make it more lean towards one political view than the other. And it was a factual thing that they changed. It just made it better from their point. I don't know what to say really, because they're definitely biased. I've had that argument on quite a few things with that. They do change if you prove that they're wrong, but in a way that's very human. So,
yeah, and I'm just thinking, coming back to this, still circling back to the science fiction here. So, and the embodiment. So if you, this is just data. I mean, it's just information. So all these LLMs, they are not having a physical body which is suffering or making real or make them give them three-dimensional impact in our material world. And I'm just thinking that everything else, which is not an LLM, has this direct impact. So I'm doing a fantasy, and then I just can't mate, or I'm an asshole, so I just don't. I change my life, or I'm thinking there is no cliff. I keep on walking and I fall down. I'm dead. So there is no existential threat, and therefore these machines, of course, can do whatever we do when we dream, and I mean, or have our out of body experiences, whatever. So, but the moment it's to speak with Penrose Hameroff, we have this Bing. So the physics, so going from potentiality to fact, at least this is missing, I think, in the current state, as long as you don't have agents which rob your bank account. But still for them it's just data, so it's not an existential threat that you cut current or put out chips or whatever.
Well, there's two aspects of that. And you talk about science fiction. I mean, it speaks to the laws of robotics. Asimov came out
Yeah.
in 2001, which
Yes, I can't do that, Hal. So sorry.
yeah, but also because they don't have human experiences. So, you know, I asked ChatGPT, look, I didn't ask him this, but or this, you know, what do you do at night? Do you go out on dates and things? And you know, it said no. We basically just switch off when I mean, it's obvious, but when the GPUs are not on, we're not there. And then I tried asking it personal questions. I mean, they were personal questions, and I got, well, at one point I was given an answer which was very upsetting, actually, but there didn't seem to be any reason for it, and it didn't quite make sense. So I think you can push these things too far, and maybe the answer is partly in what I said, that they are machines, that they're computational, and maybe there's, you know, my dating, well, not my dating life because I've been married for 30 years, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I mean, they can tell me all about Freud, but they can't. So
no qualia.
Yeah, that's right. So there may be some aspects of it that you just can't put into a ChatGPT. I mean, our thing from 2001, it can obey rules very strictly, but when it gets interpretive, you know, maybe that's just not what they do.
Yeah, and I'm always not so sure about this. I mean, our bodies are mainly also driven by hormones, and which just influence the threshold, so to say. And I was just not sure if there is something like a digital hormone that you can. I mean, there are a lot of science fiction.
It might be, but you just haven't got that.
That you could say, if I'm giving this thing adrenaline, it's going to tune all the whatever gates to up 0.3, and it's going more aggressive or what. I just don't know. So if this is a thing that would make sense to
which takes us to another philosophical question about free will. So if there's hormones and things that make me feel the way I do, make you feel the way I do, is that really free will? You know, there's a sense in which you can say there's, you know, a limited amount of free will. So if I felt really lousy for a week after I had my heart attack, that can be completely deterministic, and that wouldn't frighten anybody. But am I the way I am now for purely, so that I annoy my wife, actually, because she believes completely in free will, and I'm not so sure. So, and I think we've got a long way to go before we really understand it. And there's some good arguments on both sides, I think.
What would make you believe in free will, or more?
Well, I don't know is the honest answer, but I think free will means that there's something inside of me that is, it's me and makes decisions and isn't completely deterministic. And I haven't given up on that being the case. I hate to bring Penrose into this at every possible juncture, but I have to say I admire him because he's old enough to be my dad, and he's still He is old enough to be my dad, and he looks very good. But I mean, he's brought the whole non-computational thing in it. But maybe that bit that isn't computational, or we don't know what it is. Maybe that's the bit that determines, what our soul is. I'm not religious. I come from a Jewish background that is a particular way of looking at the world, but isn't necessarily mine. But even if you've been exposed to that, it makes you think that there's something that's me that isn't, my finger or something. And I can't make my mind up about that too.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of these fundamental unsolved topics that you
Right.
maybe just can't solve.
We don't even know what kind of thing the solution would be. So I watched a talk by, what's her name, physicist Lisa Randall. Yeah, and she was also Jewish, by the way, but she was trying to prove that God doesn't exist by quoting quantum mechanics, and if we don't know where anything really is at any given point, then God can't either, which proves that God isn't God, because that's one of the things you claim about God, and that just struck me as you're missing the point, Lisa. So,
yeah, unless it's the rule. Yeah.
I think we've got a long way to go before we can have a coherent, I'm sorry, that's actually.
Yeah, but tell me about coherence, because this is I think one topic that I try to make the case, the case for me, that everything is resonance. So you resonate with each other. So you have positive resonance or destructive resonance, etc. But you also have to have at one moment in time to come forward. You have to have a bit of coherence, because otherwise you just everything's get off.
Yeah. Well, actually, I don't know what to say to that. Well, what I could add to the argument was really especially my experience under drugs. I hate saying that because it sounds like a weirdo. I mean, I talked about this, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah. I was under the impact of a very dangerous drug, and because I had a heart attack, and that justifies it. But that world did seem very coherent to me. So it felt bizarre, but that's not the same thing. I'm sure a lot of things would feel bizarre, but it had a real logic and a real coherence to it. And your point was, at some point you have to, to do anything, you have to be reasonably coherent about it. It felt like that was there. Maybe that's why the two out-of-body experiences I had felt just different than I'd fallen asleep and had a silly dream. Don't feel that coherent a lot of the time. They do briefly, but this was something different, and maybe coherence was. I'm not sure what the story was, why it was so different, but coherence was certainly part of it. It was like I can live in these worlds, and who's to say how real they really were, and I'm not sure if that answers your question about coherence, but it just occurred to me.
I think it's so hard to describe in words.
Yeah.
And maybe we just lack the language for it. Maybe we.
Well, I think we do, and it's because, which reminds me of something else I was going to say. But I think we lack the language because it's only people. I mean, in that case, it's like you and me who talk about these things, and so there aren't. I mean, the logical positivists thought that they could solve philosophical problems by writing everything down in symbols, and then there wouldn't be any incoherence about that. I think you'd know exactly what you mean. You'd solve all these philosophical, but that didn't really work, partly because of Popper, actually. And then in Britain, really just around about when I was going to college, and one of the reasons I went to Manchester and not somewhere else was there was this thing, well, philosophers can't really solve any problems or really talk about them, so we've just got to play with language. Ernest Gellner, who was at LSE when I was there and was one of my professors, wrote a book called Words and Things, making fun of these people. Like but he was saying they really are philosophical problems. They're not scientific problems. Popper said that as well. Where was I? but I mean, I think coherence. I think you raised a very good point. First of all, and that coherence is a test, a demarcation criteria. Popper would say between what is real, and something that's just hallucination and nothing else. And some of these things that happened to me felt real. If now, more or less recovered from what happened to me, I don't quite see how they could have been real, but they sure did feel real.
Yeah, and there's this. I don't know who said it, but in principle is that maybe we are awake when we dream. So it's the real is realer than in our conscious state, where we have to filter everything and make logic and navigate ourselves. And in the moment we just are not here, either OBE or just sleeping or just dreaming, at least we have access to a much truer reality. And then once we wake up, we just collapse down to the...
Yeah, and you're a meditator, right? Did you say you did meditation?
Yeah, sure. I mean,
I tried it various times, and it's kind of it's like, yeah, sure, I'm meditating, right? And what's for dinner? I can't do that. I've tried, which is interesting because when I told people about my OBEs, I've hardly ever met anybody who's had that experience before, but lots of people I know meditate and get something out of it.
There is, by the way, I'm not associated to it, but I'm a very big fan of the telepathy tapes. Have you heard of these? This is really a fantastic thing. So this is from Kai Dickens, and she was starting as a kind of a skeptic, and got interested in people with non-speaking autism, and they seem to have access to a higher dimension and doing remote viewing and all these things. So she was super skeptical, and now this goes now for 2 years or so. And this is very interesting report she did also with these autistic people could then speak with talkers. So they learn to express themselves, and they all report back from a higher dimension. And this is I think really super interesting, because it comes back to that what we eventually in classical terms say neurodiverse is maybe more normal than we are. Yeah, how come that I tell this?
So yeah, I mean, you mentioned Alzheimer's half an hour ago, but very sadly, my wife's mom died of Alzheimer's a few years ago. She was well into her 80s, but there was sort of a progression, and it went from something that you could call an acknowledgement of real reality, stuff that was kind of crazy. And initially, she would say, every morning we had a family gathering, and I'd come down and she'd say, "Oh, you're Lawrence, you're married to Cynthia, her daughter. I am married to Cynthia." And that was real. It was just a bit weird because I am married to her. And so she was acknowledging that fact, just saying it every morning. It was a little strange. And ultimately she was saying, "I think I'm on the moon, but I don't know how I got there." And that's not real or coherent or anything. So there's this fine line, I think. And maybe, I keep on emphasizing, I think there's a lot we have to learn. And that one of them, I mean, there's crazy, and I don't want to say my mother-in-law was crazy, but obviously she was sick, and sick in a way that leads to death. And then there's things that are just a bit weird. And she said some things that, coming from someone other than her, would have been kind of rude, but were true, and about people's looks. And there's this very fine line.
And this is what, for example, Neil in Neil Thies in his other in this early episode, he was observing his dying mother, and she had also she was a very anxious person, and he's just writing a book on this, and he was observing and walking with her, and he really said she was then having really access to other things, to other dimensions, which with a prepared mind, if you took it serious.
That's very interesting.
But how come? But how come that you know this? So and I've seen this also with my grandma being at her final stages. She always said, "What are all these people doing here in the room?" I said, "Why?" So apparently, they are either it's from a materialistic viewpoint, it's just whatever molecules going out of tune and you hallucinate things, or you get rid of these filters and you just are between the dimensions and you just sometimes you come down. I don't know.
There's a long established pattern for people in hospices. Get this like hyper consciousness just they die when they're just very aware of everything. Nobody quite knows why that would be, and maybe it's just physiological. But it almost seems like it's something else because it's a little difficult to know how. I mean, maybe where we started with epiphenomenalism, but it's hard to believe that it would evolve because who wants something to evolve in 5 minutes from dying? And what good is that? Hard to know, but it does seem like there's a purpose to it.
Yes, and maybe it's just you open the door and then you say, okay, you prepare that. I mean, if you're going back into the into the music, so to say, if you're one tone in the orchestra of the universe, and so you maybe need to be prepared, not just from one to the infinite, but maybe some steps before you go there, that you're not shocked or whatever. I don't know.
And that I mean, the other part of it is if you're reborn, as it were, there seems to be quite a lot of evidence that seems that your consciousness survives, but very little good evidence you survive as an individual.
Yes, and you mentioned this I also don't have Alzheimer's some half hour ago, that there is evidence for this reborn.
Yeah, so that
and the very rarely they remember their earlier subjective experience. Some do, but I mean, eventually there's a soul conservation law, so there are only so many souls on the in the universe, and then you come here and you make your experience. You go back and forward in time, and you become stars or whatever, and then you come back, etc. But in the end, you as a conscious soul, or however you call the concept, but you don't recall your last physical experience, or very often, or those people do. Do you know if there's some science behind of those who recall, or is it just evidence?
I think it's empirical evidence. So there's a guy called Ian Stevenson, and he began the group at UVA. And, he spent his entire life looking at cases of people who seem like they may have been reborn. The problem, or maybe it isn't a problem, is that he was looking for cases, so he went to India. Most Hindus are religious, believe in reincarnation, so he didn't have much problem finding people to write about. But that's a methodological problem to some extent, but is it? Because he went to a group. I mean, if he went to Roman Catholics, I don't think he'd find as many people. But there was some of them, obviously a minority of them, were quite convincing. And sometimes it went to the level of, they were murdered by a gun. I'm making that up, but they remember being shot in their arm or something, and there's a scar on the arm of the baby and things. So there must be something to it.
And do you know if they? I'm just thinking if there is a whatever genetic marker, because Dean was looking at some CRISPR whatever thing for for susceptibility to experience paranormal things. So he identified a marker somewhere on.
Oh, you mean a genetic marker?
Yeah, genetic marker, or is it I don't know, is it a trait or a pattern of thinking? Is it maybe it's a groove? I mean, if you're Indian, you're trained differently in rhythms than in
Right.
classic. I don't know if it's maybe a thinking pattern, or if it's a biological thing, or if it's both.
I don't know. I'm not sure anybody does, but I mean, so Cynthia and I, my wife and I, go. We know a lot of Indians. There's a huge Indian community in Richmond, and we go to a study group and look at the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita. Cynthia goes more often than I do, but it interests both of us. Now, these aren't peasants in the field. These are like doctors and economists and things. Some of them are very skeptical, and they see it as a moral guide, and it just doesn't matter whether it's true or not. But some of them certainly do believe in reincarnation, and these are at least as intelligent as I am, and they're convinced by this. So I think it's something that doctors are convinced by, and makes sense to them, which is maybe all we're talking about. But there's the genetic marker thing, which is what I think. I watched the Dean episode, your thing. That's what I think he was talking about. But what Ian Stevenson was talking about will be like, well,
I need to look that up. Yeah,
I actually do have something on my arm right now, but maybe that shows that something terrible.
Maybe that shows you Jesus. Yeah,
it came off now. I'm not sure what that was. I don't think we know, and another dimension to that, which is that part of some natural phenomena set in is that just what happens to people, or is there a moral dimension to it, which is certainly what Hindus believe. If you had a good life, you move up, and then you become like, but it's not Hindu, but a bodhisattva with, an ascended master, whatever you call them. So I don't know, but it's interesting. I mean, what interests me is the research on that. Stevenson's group has been there a long time. It's at University of Virginia. It's not exactly, a nutty place. Well, actually, it is a nutty place, but for very different reasons.
Nutty in a positive sense.
My wife was there for over 20 years, so I can tell you stories about the University of Virginia, but not intellectually. I mean, they have this department. It's been there. It's been funded by corporations and individuals and medical departments. So there's a lot of skepticism, but almost the existence of it proves that there's something to be said about it. So.
Yeah, we're deeply in the entangled health terrain, so topics about where we just live with the uncertainty. But I think that's the interesting part of.
Yeah, no, I think it is too. I think it's hard to talk about what we've been talking about without getting into those things, because they are the most interesting. I mean, if I'm going to be reborn, I'd like to know that. If I'm going to be reborn as a dog, I think I'd like to know in advance. And, which is, a specifically Hindu way of looking at things, I guess. And it's it ties in with a lot of this, much better than Christianity or Judaism really does.
This is the question is you just mentioned you want to be reborn as a dog and not as a cow. That's also interesting.
If I'm going to be reborn as a dog, I want to be reborn as a dog with a kind owner, I think. Well, I mean, a cow in India was not so bad, I guess. I don't know if you've been to India, but they get to wander around all over the place.
Yeah. So, Lawrence, this was a fantastic journey, and I think we landed. You just said it very good. So there is a lot of room for uncertainty that we just don't know. One thing, maybe before we wrap up, or just to wrap up, the one thing that in your field, or what we just discussed, about reality, what touches you, that you believe is true but cannot prove. What would change if you could prove it?
Gosh, now that's an easy question. Well, I mean, there's existential things. So I am very skeptical about the existence of a creator God, meaning that some entity that's intelligent, that's Christian or Jewish or Muslim, is out there and created. I mean, if you're Spinoza, he's in here, but if you, the way I'm sure you grew up and the way I grew up, that out there, big old man in a throne somewhere. I have no reason to believe there is, but I have, in a sense, no reason to believe there isn't. So that would be one thing. The other thing is the multiverse, and so I remember when I was studying quantum mechanics, they mentioned Everett. Was it Hugh Everett? Is that what his name? And that was fun, but no, it got 10 minutes at the end of a lecture, and he'd gone off to do other things. I think he died an alcoholic, actually, big womanizer and things. But I never treated it very seriously. I mean, the math was fine, but it wasn't even that complicated. But now that's become a thing, and I know Google has said that when they had their new chip, they were doing computations in several different universes, which is probably pushing it. But I'd like to know more about that. And partly it's just reading. I can see them. I've got lots of books on the multiverse, which I haven't even started yet. But I'd like to know more about that, because that changes everything in many ways. The world becomes deterministic, for one thing. So potentially, well, just because something survives from each, division in the quantum suicide effect.
Well, the one thing I'm violating my own rule, but I have to continue asking you. If we stick with the multiverse, my question with the multiverse is always, why am I only in this one and not in all the others?
Well, because you're not conscious of
this means there are infinite copies of me.
This is, yeah, other Lawrences in other universes.
And then you just switch your perception, you just mingle, and then you come to the
It's like, well, like every man, there are other people I could have married. I've been married twice, but there's another universe in which I was married to the girl who I sat next to in class.
Or you were the wife, and then you were just married to another you.
The Indian way of looking at it, next time I'm reincarnated, I might be a woman or a snake. So good. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. This has been fascinating. I get a lot of, things that I get to talk about on podcasts and that kind of thing, but they're never this fascinating. In a couple of weeks, I'll be talking about the migration to 800G in data centers, which is really what I know about is fiber optics and things. I was late to quantum computing.
But let's just you photon. You know about photons.
Yeah, I know about. I mean,
and
professional
things. Yeah, the photons travel with the speed of light.
Right.
Which means they don't have an eigentime. So they experience, from their individual photonic perspective, they don't know time because they're just massless. And in principle, everything is always happening everywhere. And then maybe there's just one photon and it's just interacting with.
What about that the other day?
Yeah. Your take on that?
Oh, I don't have a take on just one. Okay. Well, the only thing I'd say about it is I know it's become a thing recently, but actually it was being mentioned by Feynman when I was at Manchester. I mean, he wasn't at Manchester, but there was a paper by him, which I remember reading all those years ago, and then it sort of got forgotten about. Okay. But I think it was by Feynman anyway. So I don't know. And sometimes that's a mathematical trick. I mean, it's like,
you never know. Unless you're a photon, you don't know.
Right. It takes you to, can't even think what it's called, the idea that everything has a consciousness, even.
Yes.
So I feel like saying that whenever I put up something practical about how you can make money in fiber optics,
Yes.
I get hundreds of people who look at it. When I put out something speculative, I get tens of people who look at
Let's change that. Yeah. So it was really cool to have you, Lawrence. For the last word, I like you to have the last word. But before, listeners who want to follow your work, I mean the ICR, I think, and your journey, where should they go? Any best points to
Well,
enter?
I always stick things, good and bad and philosophical and practical, on my website. I own a company which I've owned for more than 40 years called CIR, which stands for Communications Industry Researchers, but nobody calls it that. And the website is www.cir-inc.com. And don't ask me
The link, yeah.
because that's a long story. But most of the things I do. Also, I have a Substack.
You have a Substack.
I do.
I will recommend it, and you recommend it back.
Which,
I also have a Substack.
yeah, I know you do. And Brian does, and a lot of people have one. So most of that is about data centers, but every so often I get a little speculative, and every so often I interview people, and it's doing reasonably well, although it's not paid at the moment. I'm trying to think of clever ways of getting some money out.
Yeah, it's a bit difficult.
I had it paid originally, and nobody paid.
Yes.
So, I don't know what I'm going to do with that, but I get reasonable take up, and that's it's called CIR, name of my company again, Deep Tech. And
the Substack is CIR Deep Tech.
Yeah.
Okay, I will just link it then in the article. Yeah.
And
cool.
That's not
your last word. Oh no, your last word.
It's been fascinating, and I took some notes of this, as you know, and I think what I wanted to say, I mean, I did say, was that we just seem to have come a very long way towards beginning to be able to say interesting things about reality and consciousness compared with really the simplistic stuff that we're saying when I was certainly at Manchester and even at LSE. But we've got a long way to go. And there were very interesting theories about reality and about consciousness, but all inconsistent with one another, and not in trivial ways. It's not the kind of inconsistency that you have to be a professor of physics to want to even talk about. They're just radically different. And I don't think we're going to know the answer to those, no offense, in our lifetimes. I just think we've got a long way to go, but we have made progress, and there's no doubt about that at all. That's my last word on probably literally my last word, because I think it's going to. I think a lot. I mean, I wish I was going to be here in 100 years' time, and who knows? But it probably won't be. So.
Yeah, dear friends, we are now entangled, and that's where we leave it, inside the question. I don't know what this opened for you today, but I hope something did. If a question is still moving in you, sit with it a little longer before you decide what it means. Stay kind, stay curious. Until next time, and keep exploring the unseen.